Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I'd like to share with you some more thoughts on open files and how you can use them either for an attack or for positional gains. Let's start with our first example, where it is Black's turn. What's the first impression on this position? Well, we can see kind of quite quickly that there is a material balance. White has some pressure on the 7th rank. The queen seems to be well positioned in the center, aiming at g7, while black, on the other hand, has all his major pieces aiming at the white king. In such situations, it's usually quite important whose turn it is. In this case, this is from a real game between two grandmasters, Mokri and Yusupov. It was Black's turn, and that kind of decided the outcome of the game. Black actually has more than one good way to continue here, but the way Yusupov continued certainly does the job as well. He moved the rook to g5, aiming at the pawn on g2. Now, of course, white could go on the run immediately, but that pretty much is a resignation to the fight. It only delays the end. But the black queen would come to h1 and then capture the pawn on g2, and so on. However, after g3, black is ready to win the game, and black has actually, again, more than one winning move. I'll show you the game first. Black played queen h3, getting ready to sacrifice on g3, and after white defended against that, simply get the rook behind the queen on the h file, and then queen h1 is coming up, and the checkmate is only a few moves away. Incidentally, black could have won immediately also by sacrificing on g3 right away, and then take back, king f2, queen h2, forcing the king back to the first rank, and then play rook g1. After which, it's true that at the moment white has two rooks for the queen, but as soon as the king moves out of the check, here comes the fork, and the rook on c7 falls. So what was the point in this example? What we saw is that black wanted desperately to get his queen and rook both to the opened h file, as white no longer had an h-pawn. However, black had to be extremely careful not to do queen h3 right away, which at first looks quite good. It's a pin, the pawn cannot capture it, and if the pawn advances to g3, then just rook captures on g3 and black indeed wins. I hope by now you figured out why queen h3 is a blunder. And the response to that is a counter combination. And that also tells you how you always need to be so careful and look out for your opponent's good moves as well. So here, white would sacrifice on g7, and then after the trades on g7, capture the queen, as there is no longer a pin. And now white is a pawn up. A very simple but nice example on how to follow up an attack. Let's move on to some more strategical examples now. Here we go. This is a rather closed type of position where white has a little bit of space advantage because of the pawn being on d5. And also, white, as well as black, has both already doubled up on the only open file in the position on the c file. White also has a knight on c6 That looks quite nice. The problem is that black is about to trade it off for his bishop and win a pawn. So that knight better moves. And the knight indeed moved to a7, attacking the black rook right away. The rook moved to e8, and now came knight to d1. It's true that this move is moving backward. However, it is quite important to open the c file so white can gain the control of the c file and of key squares on the c file. Black traded, and the rook captured back. Black played bishop e7. And now the knight is safe to come back to c6 because it is protected twice. Black played bishop f6. Knight a5. Now, knight on a5 is already very solid, certainly in no danger whatsoever. Queen b8, bishop a7. The poor queen is being chased, and the knight is back again on c6, kind of trapping the queen. If the queen would move now to the c file, white could have a discovered check with knight e7. Of course, the same would result if the queen would move to c8 instead. Therefore, black had no other choice but to capture. While now both captures give white an advantage, the pawn capture is a whole lot better because now this far advanced pawn is very, very dangerous. Also, we can see the beautiful route for the white knight coming to d5, very attractive. Black, in search for counterplay, played f4. White kind of ignored it, knight c3. If now pawn takes on g3, queen takes back, attacking the pawn on g6. Preventing that threat, black played king h7, and the knight arrived to an ideal dream square on d5. Pawn captures, of course, queen captures back, and black at least won a pawn. However, that doesn't mean too much because the white c-pawn is pretty unstoppable. After knight c7, white could pin the knight with bishop to b6. Came bishop g5, c7, and black is lost, had to capture, and black resigned. This is a game by Polugajewski versus Danner. Let's move on to our next example, where again white has a very clear initiative, being in full control of the A file. And here Korchnoi, playing white against Timman, played very nicely, played queen c1, attacking the pawn on h6, and after king h7, also the queen appeared on that only open file, attacking the knight on e7. Black protected it, and now the queen got in, so to say, to the belly of the black position. Also, right away, attacking the knight on d7. Of course, if that knight moves, the other knight would be falling. So black had not much of a choice but to play bishop b7 to avoid the immediate loss of material. In such positions, we can feel that white has the momentum, white has the initiative, its pieces are very well positioned, but it's sometimes not easy to see immediately how to transform that to a bigger advantage or to a material advantage. However, these are the times when you should feel that there must be something. Your position is so good, you're in so much more active position than your opponent, it's barely hanging on to its pieces, there must be something to increase your advantage. And in this case, that powerful move is to move the knight to h4, which on one hand puts more pressure on the pawn on g6 and also has opened up the long diagonal for the bishop to target the pawn on c6. While here it was a little better for black to capture on b5 and then eventually end up losing only a pawn, white, of course, is better than as well. Black played c5, which made things worse, trying to keep the position closed, because the white bishop immediately arrives on c6. And at this stage, black cannot avoid losing material. The black pieces are tied down too much, trying to defend too many things all at once. If the knight from e7 moves, white can grab the pawn on g6 with a check. If the bishop moves from b7, then the problem will be that the 7th rank opens up and the knight on d7 will be in trouble. Let me show you how the game ended real quick. Black didn't see anything better than play knight f6 and give up an exchange, but of course that wouldn't solve much either. Now white simply won 2 pawns at the end of this deal, and black resigned. And now let's see 2 old games by former world champion Alexander Alekhine. Here we go. This looks like a very solid, normal, typical position, with maybe white being slightly better, having a bit of space advantage. It's quite impressive how, in just a few moves, things turned around and Alekhine developed a quite significant advantage. First of all, he played rook f2 d1 with the idea to trade all the rooks on d8 and then grab the pawn on a7. So black had to do something about it and played b6. So far, so good. And now Alekhine made a seemingly mysterious move, but actually a very good one. Played h3. This is an important move to take away the g4 square from the black knight in case white would advance the f-pawn. Or as you shall see sometimes, white in fact is preparing to play g4. Black responded by playing c5. White retreated the rook, and black traded. Queen took. Now white has full control of the d-file. You may wonder, why did black trade? However, it's not so easy to find moves for black either, and I think white could have followed up with similar plans, as we'll see in the game itself. In addition, another plan that white could have had was to advance the e-pawn and then get the knight to e4 and d6 had black not traded on d2. After queen d2, black played c4, which is a mistake. It was better to play knight e8 and prevent what was coming. White now played f4. This is a very strong move, preparing the advancement of both e and f pawns. Black played g6, trying to get rid of the back rank problem for now. And now queen d4, improving the position of the queen, especially for situations if the black king would end up going to g7. Also, by having the queen on d4, eyeing on the pawn on c4, black needs to watch out for f5 and then the bishop moves, capturing the pawn. For that reason, black played rook c8, protecting the pawn. And white, surprisingly at first, played g4. Even though it's true that the white king has castle to the king's side, and typically we do not recommend to open up the position in front of your king. In this case, the black pieces are far from the white king, and because white is so active, all the pieces are ideally positioned, white can afford to do that. Black here kind of panicked and gave up his bishop for only 2 pawns. And then after knight takes, white just played king g2. So if the black queen appears on h4, the white rook can respond with rook h1 and won in a few more moves. You may wonder what would have happened if black doesn't sacrifice the piece, but instead plays, let's say, rook c5. Then white would move forward with f5, chasing the bishop back, and then trade the queens. And here already it's a clear calculation on how to cash in. And here white could play either e5 or g5 with a huge advantage for white. Let's move on to our next example, another game of Alekhines. Here we are. Again, we see a pretty symmetrical type of position with even balanced material. However, black has an advantage, and that is that they control the only open file. Now, in situations like this, it's quite important whose turn it is. If it was white's turn, white immediately could oppose the black rook and play rook d1. However, in the game it was black's turn, and black played queen d7. What that means is that the white rook is not able to oppose the black major pieces. White responded by playing rook f1, trying to kind of defend the king, and black played queen d3. If now white would trade queens, black could just recapture with the rook, and then after knight e2, win the pawn on c3. After queen d3, white responded by playing queen b3 check, king h8. Now the problem is the pawn is hanging on e4. Therefore, the knight retreated to g3. And here black has more than one good way to play. Knight e2 would win a pawn immediately, because then after knight takes, queen takes, the only way to defend the pawn is to play f3, but that would lose immediately, thanks to the rook getting in to d2. Of course, white is not forced to play f3 here, and should rather give up the pawn than to allow the penetration of the rook to the second rank. Let's go back. After knight g3 in this position, Alekhine played even more forcefully. He played h5 with the idea to chase the knight away and not even trade knights. White has no choice but play bishop c1, h4. Now if the knight moves, things are really bad for white with knight e2 coming. So therefore, bishop takes knight, which is a tricky move. If now knight takes the pawn takes the knight, then bishop takes back and white is okay. But the other pawn took back on f4, came knight f5 and h3. This is a very typical type of idea when an h-pawn is being used to provoke weaknesses in the opponent's kingside position. Came queen e6 and pawn captured. King captured back, which is a mistake. f3 check. King can only hang on to the rook by coming to g1. And now black has a beautiful winning combination. Checkmate in 2, queen f1, and rook d1. What a powerful game. And now let's see the jewel of the week. This is a truly amazing endgame. White is a pawn up, but as we know, in rook endgames that very often is not sufficient to win. As usual, I suggest you try to solve it. I would say this is an extra difficult one, so I would at least give yourself 15 minutes or more trying to figure out the solution. Amazingly, even right on the first move, what white needs to do is give up his extra pawn. After d3, which is a fork, black can capture the pawn two ways, either the rook or the king. Let's see first the simpler one. What happens if king captures? Well, what this whole endgame is about is chasing the king into skewers. Here we go, but king comes to d5, protecting the rook on c4 just on time. But here is a second skewer, rook d3, king e5. Now this is one of those funny situations that if white takes either of the rooks, one of his own rooks are hanging as well. Therefore, the rook needs to go to h5, getting away from the attack of the c4 rook. If now king e6, then with two more checks, finally white wins the rook. Therefore, it's a bit trickier for black to play king f6 right now, and after rook d7, king g6. All of a sudden threaten with checkmate with rook c8 and attack the rook. But fortunately for white, white can win by connecting the two rooks and then just blocking the check on d8. Well, this was the simple line. Let's see the more difficult one. d3, rook takes. Of course, now again we need to play very forcefully with a check. King d5, rook d8, king e5. So now we have a similar type of situation where all the rooks are hanging. So if white captures either rook right away, white will lose a rook as well. So again, the rook is trying to move out from the attack while the other rook still is hanging. But now the king moves back to defend. If rook d8, we would be just repeating moves. So now white plays rook h5. If now king d6, rook d8, if king c6, rook c8. But what happens if king d4? Quite amazingly here, white has time for a quiet move and putting black pretty much in a zugzwang. White's winning move here is the only winning move, king h8, getting away from any checks from either rook. I suggest you play around and figure out how to win against every one of the rook moves available at black's disposal. Just to show you one example, if rook c6, then check, and for example king c4, rook h4, and the rook falls. But what happens if now black plays a5? Then actually white will play rook h7 to get away, further away from the black rooks, and the black rooks have no way of getting out of the threat of just rook d7 or rook d8 check. For example, after rook g3, check, and now the correct move is rook c7. And now if the king goes to the b file, then rook b8, or if the king goes to the d file, then rook d8, and the rook is falling. This king h8 move was really absolutely beautiful, as simple and quiet as beautiful. Well, I hope you enjoyed this duel and gives you an idea of the battle of four rooks. Thank you for listening, and so long.